Okay, guys. So yesterday, the SEC announced that they announced who were going to be the annual opponents for every team in the SEC with this new 3-6-6 model that they're going to, since they're going to move to 9 conference games a year now. By the way, the ACC also announced that they're going to do 9 conference games a year, and they're going to require that all ACC opponents play an additional non-Power 4 opponent, just like the SEC. So now every Power 4 conference is now playing 9 games, plays 9 conference games a year. The Big 12, the Big 10, the ACC, and the SEC. The difference is that the ACC and the SEC are also requiring one more non-Power 4 opponent outside of those 9 conference games. The Big 12 and the Big 10 are not requiring that. So here are what the 3 annual opponents are for every team in the conference. SEC, I'm talking about. Alphabetical order: Alabama is Auburn, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Missouri, Texas, LSU, Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, Georgia, Auburn, Florida, South Carolina, Kentucky, Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, LSU, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Ole Miss, Texas, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, LSU, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Texas, Texas A&M, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, LSU, Missouri, Texas, Vanderbilt, Auburn, Tennessee, and Mississippi State. Those are the 3 annual opponents for every team. In the conference. Now, this is going to be on a 4-year cycle, so that means that every let's see, 2026, 27, 28, 29, in 2030, every team in the SEC will likely get a new trio of opponents to face every year. Maybe not. There's going to be, not saying that they're going to get 3 new opponents. There's just going to be some rivalries that stay locked in, like the Iron Bowl or the Deep South Lotus rivalry with Georgia and Auburn. I'm not saying certain rivalries are going to be removed now, but what I'm saying is the 3 teams that you face over these next 4 years on an annual basis, that will get reevaluated when the 4-year cycle is done. So whichever 3 opponents that Florida has in 2029, the Georgia game is going to stay. So likely the 2 opponents that Florida faces outside of Georgia will be different in 2030. Now, I did record my thoughts on this yesterday, but it was kind of more spur of the moment. I didn't really like how it sounded. It was kind of like I was just rambling instead of, actually breaking it down. So I kind of wanted to redo it again, which was what you're hearing right now. For Florida, I knew they were going to keep the Georgia-Florida rivalry. That was not going to go away. They gave us South Carolina and Kentucky. I've said it before. I don't consider South Carolina or Kentucky to be football rivals. I do consider Kentucky a basketball rival because Kentucky is the top program. Because Florida and Kentucky are easily the 2 top programs in the SEC. And I don't even think that's up for debate. I mean, Florida has won 3 national championships this century, has been in 5 Final Fours this century, and has been in 4 national title games this century with a 3-1 record in that sense. So I think it's obvious Florida is the number 2 big brand in SEC men's basketball. I don't think that's really up for debate. But anyways, I don't think South Carolina and Kentucky are rivals to Florida football. Yes, Kentucky gave Florida a little bit of trouble. Has given Florida a little bit of trouble the last 6 or 7 years, and there was a point in time in which it seemed like Florida was like their little brother. With the way they beat us down in 2023 and how they killed our momentum coming off of the Utah win in 2022, and they beat Florida in 2021, which I thought was the beginning of the end of Dan Mullen's reign in Florida, in my opinion. I think that was the loss where, okay, you lose to Kentucky twice now, and then things just kind of went downhill from there. So Kentucky's been a thorn in the Gator hide, so to speak. South Carolina, there was a little bit of a rivalry there with when Steve Spurrier was coaching. Steve Spurrier, obviously the greatest Florida Gator football person of all time in Florida Gators football, in my opinion. Won a Heisman as a player, was obviously what he did with Florida as a made Florida a powerhouse as a football coach, 6 SEC championships and a national title. Could have potentially had more. And he goes to South Carolina, and of course South Carolina wins more. Has their best run in the history of their program under Steve Spurrier. They had 3 straight years of 11-win records. When before, I think they never even. I think they don't. I don't even think they had one season where they had more than 10 victories, let alone 11. So there was a little bit of a tension there, and plus losing to South Carolina has been it costs Florida coaches a couple of jobs. 2021 was the game where the players quit on Dan Mullen when South Carolina blew them out, and the loss to South Carolina in 2014 ended up costing Will Muschamp his job because it was time to move on at that point. So there's a little bit of history with South Carolina and Kentucky. Kentucky has played Florida the third most of any program in the SEC and across the country. The only 2 teams that have played Florida more than Kentucky is Auburn and Georgia. Kentucky has played Florida 75 times. But like I said before, even though there's a lot of history there, I don't consider them a rivalry because I can't look at you as a rival if I beat you 31 straight times. I just can't do it. Even if we were say Oklahoma State in the Bedlam series, yeah, they hate each other because they're in the same state, but it's not really that much of a rivalry when you spawn decades and decades of consistent victories over an opponent. I can't consider that a rivalry. So Kentucky is just not a rival to me in football. South Carolina, we never really dominated them to that extent, but it's just we've kind of been like their big brother for the most part since they joined the conference. And the more and more Florida and South Carolina play each other, the more Florida has won majority of the time. But it has been some fun games between Florida and South Carolina, so I don't necessarily mind Florida playing South Carolina. It brings a little bit of that SEC East back with facing Georgia, South Carolina, and Kentucky. So you do get some divisional familiarity there. Now, now I've said it before, if you've heard me talk about it before, I've said even online to other Gator fans, if I had it my way, it would have been Georgia, LSU, Tennessee. And some Gator fan wrote back to me and said, well, don't you want Florida to win games? And I'm like, that's the problem. Florida right now is because we've been on such a bad stretch of football. We've been having a defeated mindset, and we've been acting as if it's too difficult for Florida to play those opponents every single year when we were doing that throughout this entire century anyway. I mean, even the last 2 years without even 2025 this year and 2024 last year without the divisional format, we still play Georgia, LSU, and Tennessee every single year. So I don't understand why it's a problem now. Just because you're going to add an extra SEC game, well, I'm sorry, that's too bad. Because in a sense, you're already playing at least 2 teams in the SEC were going to play 9 SEC games anyway when you got 8 games in a regular season, and then you got the SEC championship game. Why is an SEC championship game not considered a conference game is beyond me. But it was in a sense it kind of was. If you were going to win an SEC championship, you were going to have to play 9 true conference games anyway. Now, I always had a suspicion that the SEC wasn't really going to keep the Florida-Tennessee game, because I've said it before. I think the only rival of Florida that the SEC truly values as that top tier rivalry is the Georgia game. I don't think the SEC really valued the Florida-Tennessee rivalry like they once used to. Granted, that was when the Florida and Tennessee rivalry hasn't really been that good since maybe the mid to early 2000s, because from the 1990s to about the mid 2000s, Florida and Tennessee was arguably the top rivalry in the conference at that time, because both of these programs were competing for national championships at the time, and they were in the same division. This isn't like with Georgia and Auburn, it's one of the biggest rivalries in the SEC, but they're in different divisions, so you can get them twice because they're going to play each other, because they could play each other in a cross-division format matchup and then play each other in the SEC title game. With Florida and Tennessee, they were guaranteed to play each other every other year because they were in the division, but they were only going to play each other once, so the winner of that was going to go to the SEC title game. I think Steve Spurrier said most of the time, in order to win the SEC title game, we had to beat Alabama. But in order to make it there, we had to beat Tennessee. That rivalry has lost its luster in the 2000s to 2020s now because both of these programs have in a way fell off. Tennessee was terrible. Florida was bad in the 2010s, and I think Tennessee was worse in the 2020s. Florida's been absolutely terrible in this decade, and Tennessee has started to, as I think they've climbed up out of that hole, so to speak. Since they hired Josh Heupel, they have yet to have a losing record with Josh Heupel, and he's been there since 2021. So that rivalry to me died down because, well, both teams have struggled since then, and Florida has failed to rise back up to Tennessee's level. Another rivalry that went away for Florida to me was LSU. Now, while I expected the SEC to get rid of the Tennessee game, I was actually more hopeful that Florida would have kept the LSU game. And as you heard me say before, LSU got Arkansas, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Now, I understand Arkansas and Ole Miss staying there as rivals of LSU, but even if you talk to LSU fans, they're not happy that they got slated with Texas A&M. And quite frankly, neither am I. I expected the SEC to move on from the Florida-Tennessee game, but I think it was stupid that they would put Texas A&M with LSU instead of giving LSU and Florida the LSU and Florida game, keeping that going, because the hostility, no matter how bad Florida may be or how bad LSU would be, maybe the heated rivalry between the two teams are still there. Florida literally just had the running back coach Jabbar Jaloot get suspended 3 games because in a pregame scuffle between LSU and Florida, he slapped one of the LSU players. I mean, think about it. You got assistant coaches slapping one of the players. That's kind of like shows you what kind of a rivalry Florida and LSU is, and both fan bases do not like each other either. So I think the SEC kind of really messed up not giving Florida the LSU game. If you're going to take away the Tennessee game, I was kind of expecting that anyway. Not giving Florida the LSU game to me made even less sense. So those are my thoughts on Florida's 3 opponents: Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky. Well, hold on. Let me add this. If you're a South Carolina or Kentucky fan, theoretically they would be licking their lips looking at the Florida matchup because Florida is down bad right now. But that could change within a year because Florida is expected to move on from Billy Napier. There's speculation that Shane Beamer may be looking at the Virginia Tech job. If you know anything about Shane Beamer, his dad, Frank Beamer, was the head coach at Virginia Tech. And when Frank Beamer was coaching Virginia Tech was one of the top programs in the country. So there could be some, familiarity can breed contempt, but it could also breed love. And while I know that a lot of people in South Carolina love Shane Beamer and Shane Beamer loves South Carolina, I think that sentimental value with having Virginia Tech, having his dad's job at Virginia Tech would also be interesting for Virginia Tech, and I think it would be easier for him to compete at Virginia Tech than compete in South Carolina with how tough the SEC is. And for Kentucky, I mean, right now they're 2-1. They're really starting to ramp up SEC play now. They play South Carolina this week, and they still got Georgia and Tennessee and Texas and Auburn and Florida. There could be speculation on whether or not Kentucky is looking at moving on from Mark Stoops and looking to hire the Tulane coach. So for Florida, South Carolina, Kentucky, we may have a scenario where at least two of those 3 programs are moving on from their head coach. I think it's obvious Florida's going to move on from Napier, but there is possibility that Kentucky could be moving on from Shane Beamer as well. Kentucky could be moving on from Mark Stoops, excuse me. And if Shane Beamer moves on from South Carolina, now you're talking about 3 programs that are going to be facing each other on a 4-year basis, and every year on a 4-year basis, and all 3 of them could be having different coaches, meaning Florida, South Carolina, Kentucky. So that's where those are just my thoughts on Florida's 4 opponents are. And tonight, because I'm recording this on a Tuesday and the news dropped about the 3 new opponents yesterday, tonight is the night the SEC is going to be announcing the 2026 schedule. and which teams are going to face, and which teams Florida is going to face outside of Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky. And remember, the 6 teams that Florida will not face in 2026, they're going to face in 2027. Because remember, every team in this format is going to play each other at least once over the next 2 years. And over the 4-year cycle, every team in the conference is going to play each other at least twice with with a home and away outside of your neutral matchups. Maybe since Arkansas and Texas A&M are not facing each other every year, maybe they'll go away from that and make each other play on each other's college campus. I think Florida and Georgia, they're going to keep that one in. As neutral site games, and I think Texas and Oklahoma are going to stay in the Cotton Bowl during that stretch. But every team in the SEC is going to play each other at least twice over these next 4 years, and every team. Every matchup is going to have a home and away series outside of the neutral game. So that's really it. Keep your notification on tonight. That's when the news is going to drop. Which schedule every team in the SEC is going to get in 2026. So, all right, take care.